Okay, I'm going to be talking about the V layer and using MZM files. The V layer is short for the visual layer, I believe. At least that's how I think of it. It is a visual graphical layer of the board that can't actually be seen by itself. You can only see it through copying pieces of it into your game. Actually, a lot of what you see here is from the V layer. The player himself is from the V layer. This level portal behind him is from the V layer, and so is the menus that pop up when I step in front of the portal. My game actually very heavily relies on the V layer, so I made a physical representation of it in my game just to help me sort out and lay out where I want the pieces that I am referencing on the V layer to actually be laid out in the V layer. So you can't actually see the V layer in anywhere in MegaZeux. It exists solely in a non-physical manner. You can load to it through robotic and you can copy from it, but you can't actually see it. So what this is this is a visual representation of my V layer, and so I laid out all the MZM files that I am loading up to be used in game are laid out here exactly as they are in the V layer, so that I can maximize my space in the V layer and hopefully not have too much wasted space. I try to pack everything together as tightly as I could. So anytime I start my game, the first thing that happens is the V layer gets loaded up. And so I have a robot on the board that is in charge of loading the V layer if it has not been done already. And so it simply comes here and starts initializing counters and strings, and then after that it begins setting sprites, setting sprite parameters, and as it's doing that, it's also loading the visual data for where the sprite is going to exist in the overlay to the overlay using an MZM file. And the command to bring in MZM files into the overlay is put, and then you need to name the MZM file, and you need to have this @ symbol at the front. That's very important. That is what helps MegaZeux identify that as an MZM file. And then I'm loading from a folder, so I have the name of the folder, // and then the name of the MZM file, and then image file, and the parameter needs to be set to 2 if you are loading an MZM file to your V layer. If I was loading to the board, it would be 0, 0, and if I was loading to the overlay, it would be 0, 1. And then this is the location on the V layer where this MZM is going. So this program just proceeds to load every MZM file for every sprite into the location that I have determined that it needs to go to on that board that I created for the V layer. And once it's done, then the rest of the game can begin. Now it's important to note that if I wanted to, I could just copy all of this data at once using the block copy command, and I could just hit enter and save all of this as a single MZM rather than having every one of these different pieces saved as individual MZMs. But I find that it's handy to save and load them all individually so that I can change them each individual piece as needed. And actually the overlay the V layer has changed quite a lot over the last 2 years of making this game, so it's a good thing I've done it this way. For instance, originally I had other things right here that I'm no longer using in the game, so that I just leave this area blank now, and I kind of use these just these dots as a way to differentiate between space in the overlay that is not being used and actual space that is set aside for sprites. So here we have a sprite animation. And so this needs to stay black so that there's nothing drawn on in the game when the sprite is going through its animation. Here's another sprite animation right here. So opening up the robotic reference manual of the help file and looking to the vLayer section, you can see that the vLayer defaults to a certain size, but there's a counter called vLayer size that you can use to set the vLayer's maximum size to a different value. So you get a default vLayer dimension of 256 characters across by 128 characters down, and that's what I've left my vLayer at. I've found that it's sufficiently large so far for what I need. But you can change these maximum size of the vLayer and the dimensions of the vLayer. To change the dimensions of the vLayer, you would set either the counter vLayer width or vLayer height to a value, and then the game or MegaZeux would automatically fill the other value in to take up as much space as possible, or fill up the vLayer and make it a square that fits in the parameters that you have assigned to it for the maximum size. So an example is if you set the vLayer vLayer size to 50,000 and you set vLayer height to 499, then the vLayer's width would become 100 characters wide for a total vLayer size of 49,900 characters. So all block copying commands that you would use on either the board or the overlay will work for the vLayer as well. The only difference is you need to precede the number for the vLayer by the pound sign or the hashtag sign, and it also needs to be in parentheses as if it was a counter. So any of these copy commands will work. You just need to remember to use that hashtag. So if you wanted to copy a block of visual data from the vLayer to an MZM, you would use the copy block command, and then you would use the hashtags for the vLayer's coordinates, and then for the MZM file name you would just precede it by the @ symbol, and then name the file and end it with the M at the end. And that's important to do for copying from the vLayer to the MZM. You can also copy from a vLayer to a string like this. You name the string name, use the $sign for the string, and end it with a C. And then you can copy from the vLayer, from one section of the vLayer to another section of the vLayer, simply by using the hashtag signs in both of these coordinate locations. So to copy from an MZM file, or to place an MZM file on the vLayer, you would use the put command. So you'd put and then name the MZM file preceded by the @ symbol, and then image file P02 for parameter 02 for placing it to the MZM, and then the XY location in the vLayer. And then you can copy not only blocks of visual data to and from the vLayer, you can also copy individual colors or individual characters to and from the vLayer as well. And coincidentally, that's the only two things that get saved to the vLayer is colors and characters. It doesn't save block types, and it doesn't save robots. It simply saves just the character and the color data. So you would use these commands that they look like counters. Basically, you would set V layer character, and then the location, the XY location, and then the at the end you would put the character that you want to set. Or if you were going to use the set V layer color command, you would use a number to represent the color that you wanted to save to that location. So the V layer is global. You only have one V layer for your entire game. If you want more V layer, you can either make it larger, or you can load MZM files at different points in your game to the V layer that change your V layer. Okay, so MZM files have a lot more use than just as supplemental help to the V layer. MZM files store blocks of data, and not just graphical data. They can store information about robots as well, robot programs. And when you are in game and you use a robotic command to store an MZM file, if it contains a robot, it will store the robot at the point that it was running at when you created the MZM file too. So when the robot continues running, it will continue running from the point that it was saved at. So you will find storing MZM files quite handy when you are in the game editor and you need to save some bit of the level. You can save an MZM file and then choose to restore it elsewhere later. MZM files can be quite large. They can be whatever size your board is. So if you were to say save an MZM file during gameplay through robotic, you could theoretically just save your board. You could save a snapshot of your board using an MZM file, and then restore it later using a robotic command that imports an MZM file to your board. And that would be one way to save your present situation on your board for use later in your game. So there are a few things that the MZM file cannot save, and that is the player and any scrolls and sensors that are present. And any of those things will be dummied out with custom block facsimile. So one other thing I'd like to point out is that MZM files are a great way to create animations. So simply by creating an MZM file and then just numbering a few of them, you can do animations very effectively. That's what all of the fire on this board is right now. It's actually, they're all the same. They're all sprites referenced from the same position. So I'm actually just loading MZM files to this point on the board here, and then referencing sprites to that point to get the animation for the fire. So the programming to generate the animation of the fire is really simple. All I'm doing is a small loop, just loading that fire animation and using the loop count counter to load the different frames. Okay, thanks for checking out this tutorial. I hope that it helped you in some way. Bye.